Hello and welcome to another episode of Charles Weekly Party. This episode, I'm all bricked up. But before we get started, let's roll the intro. Alright, first and foremost, I need to point out that where I am right now, it is pretty darn warm. And I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but I certainly can. There's a whole chorus of crickets. So if you hear that, well, you happen to know that I'm recording this at night. So, anyway, the other piece of recording this at night is also so that I'm not recording it in the heat of the day, which, unfortunately for me, was, what's the word for it? The heat of the day today was 90 degrees. At least that was the listed high. I don't know what it actually got up to. So, the long and short of it is that it is pretty darn hot where I'm recording this still right now. And, well, that's going to make things a little bit interesting. So if you're somewhere that has similar heat or even worse heat, my sympathies go out to you. I know the heat isn't exactly fun for me, but I know that there are some people who are loving it, and all I have to say is really hope you're enjoying it because you're getting a whole lot of it. But when I said I'm talking a little bit about bricks today, well, this time I'm talking about metaphorical bricks. So, I'm going to start off by talking about a design by Red Brick Studio. And this is located in Panchet, India. So, what this is a weekend home cradled by the mountains of the Western Ghats. And when it was built, it was designed to be a getaway from city life. So it wasn't designed as in the middle of everything, enjoying the life, all that fun stuff. It was built as let's get away from all the hustle and the bustle. Which, once you deal with enough hustle and bustle, is a very nice idea. So, contrary to my usual philosophy, the project, according to the architects, was built to blend in and not stand out. Whereas my philosophy is to blend in and stand out at the same time. And I do have to say, contrary to what they said, I think it actually gets a little bit closer to my philosophy. It doesn't quite hit the nail on the head as to what I call fitting in but standing out. But it's interesting nonetheless. Now, when the client was having this particular house designed, it was very important to have larger open spaces to be able to have large family gatherings. And I know I have a couple of friends who are Indian, and when they have family gatherings, they have a lot of family there. So I can see full well the importance of having a large open space for that. And I'm not saying that everyone always has the big family gatherings. I am just using it as a more of a fully understand clause. Now, with the large open space, which ends up serving as a living and a dining room, there are, on one side is the kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. And on the other side are two mirrored bedrooms. And when I say mirrored, I mean if you look at the floor plans, it looks like someone drew out one side of the floor plan and then just flipped the page over and flipped the room over a wall and had the second one there. And I do think that's sort of interesting move. I'll mention about each of the bathrooms. You have each of them has their own full bathroom inside, whereas the bedroom on the kitchen side though is not directly connected to a bathroom. It is adjacent to one. But each having one bedroom I really messed that one up. Having one bathroom for every bedroom, I think, is a spectacular idea. Because, realistically speaking, anytime you have more people than bathrooms, or more people in a confined sort of spot and less bathrooms, it can be a little bit adventurous. And the less bathrooms that you have, the more trouble someone can be in if they and everyone else decides that they need to use them at the same time. So this is by all means a design move that I fully support and I think should actually be a more normal thing. What's so special about the bedrooms being mirrored and having the whole bathroom connection and whatnot? What that does is it actually ends up creating a subtle sort of line of symmetry, even though this is not symmetrical. And by not symmetrical, I mean there are some pieces that you could say have some elements of symmetry to them, while the whole house itself is not fully symmetrical. So I think giving that little element of symmetry actually shows that, yes, we could put symmetry in here. And yes, we did put a little bit of symmetry in here. But we're not going to make everything symmetrical. The whole thing with symmetry is, if, as I mentioned with the mirror image, if you see something on one side, you're expecting to see basically the exact same thing on the other side. And veering from that symmetry actually gives an element of surprise. Now, if you do happen to be fortunate to be staying in the bedroom closest to the kitchen, well, you're going to get the wonderful privilege of waking up and smelling the coffee, assuming you're not the one who's waking up and making the coffee. So, I guess that's the ideal spot to, I don't know, what's the word? For the early riser, that's the ideal bedroom. And if you're willing to sleep in a little bit more, that's where the other two bedrooms come into handy, or come into use. Now, it's nice to talk about all of the stuff inside, but we need to talk about the custom entryway, which, if you view a rectangle, you have on two opposing sides of that rectangle the kitchen and the two bedrooms. And on the other two longer ends of the rectangle, you have your entryways. So for each of the entryways, you have sliding metal panels. And what the sliding metal panels do is you can open them up a little bit, or you can open them up a lot of bit. And if you open them up all the way, they retract perfectly into the walls, so that it just seems like that main central space connects with the outdoors fairly easily on both sides. And the other thing that ends up doing is really finalizing the central sort of aspect of that space. Because now it's not just you're in between the bedrooms and the kitchen, but now that central space is the center of your eating, or you're eating and cooking, you're sleeping and resting, and nature itself. And I consider nature to be a very primary ingredient in any good architecture. Because if you don't have any good connections to nature, then, well, you're taking focus away from something that's absolutely stunning. Last, a couple things that I feel should be mentioned. On the outside, you have the curved roof. You have a curved roof, which actually ends up being pretty much an inverse curve of the archways, which is inside of the kitchen area, which is actually quite fascinating. But you also have pretty efficient draining system, because if you think about it, having what's essentially a gigantic gutter on the top of your roof, and I'm not saying it looks like a gigantic gutter, but functions like one, the water will need to go off of the ends, and it has pretty efficient draining to be able to do that. Now, throughout all of my discussion of the Cove House here, I haven't once mentioned the material palette. And that I'm sort of saving as I'm saving that as sort of the icing on the cake. Because that I need to put closer to where I'm putting my personal thoughts on the entire structure itself. Because if you look at it, the walls, both interior and exterior, use a tone of red that you'd actually expect to be seeing on your average brick. I'm not talking about dark red. I'm not talking about what do you call it? The dark red, or what ends up looking like a brown, but I'm talking about your standard red brick color, which, coming from a design firm called Red Brick Studio, I think is quite fitting. But the roof, where I'm drawing the connection here, the roof is a gray color, very similar to a mortar. And by mortar, I mean the mortar that you're using between bricks when you're actively doing masonry, not a war mortar. And then everything else outside of that immediate area is has various wood tone out. You have some wood, you have some glass, and you have some stone. But taking the main part of the Cove House into account there, it's almost as if the piece is designed to look like a non-average brick. This may just be my interpretation, but having what's basically brick colored with a roof over it that's the color of the mortar that you'd use with a brick, I think really creates a sort of attribute of putting the house into the mindset of a brick. And it does this in more than one way. And again, I'm doing interpretation here. So this may or may not be what the architects actually thought about, but I'm hoping that my interpretation is pretty close. If you have a brick, right? You have one solitary brick. Doesn't do much, does it? Sure, the brick, when it's combined with a whole bunch of other things, or a whole bunch of other bricks, can become part of a masterpiece. But on its own, a brick isn't all that much. And realistically speaking, if you don't want your bricks to go too far on you, you're going to want some system of connecting them to one another, which is what the mortar's for. So in this case, the Cove House having sort of a brick-like nature to it symbolizes that the house itself is meant to be part of something larger. It's, It's cradled by surrounding mountains. So it's not what part of the symbolism here that I'm seeing is that you have that house, and it's not designed to be the masterpiece. It's designed to go with something else, which is the surrounding mountains and the views that creates to make a masterpiece. When the owner had this house designed, it was designed as a weekend house and designed to be able to host family gatherings as well. Now, a weekend house by nature isn't something where you're spending the majority of your time in. The weekend house is just part of your altogether routine. So the weekend house by itself does not provide. Anyway, the owner mentioned that this is designed to be a weekend house. And that means that this whole system, or this weekend house, is a part of overall life for the owner, but it's not the key piece. It's a part. So in this case, the owner's overall residence is provided by a dwelling place in the city and a weekend sort of getaway spot to not have to deal with the hustle and the bustle, to separate work attitude from relaxing weekend attitude. So, while the material choice doesn't necessarily strike my fancy well, the symbolism that it ends up creating, I think, is where the real masterpiece is. And taking just the house into account doesn't do much, but you need to take in the overall surroundings to get it to stand out but blend in. But as much as I'd like to keep talking about the Cove House, I need to stray away and talk about a different kind of brick. The kind of brick made out of computing components that altogether form what's called a graphics card. Because New World MMO beta has been bricking RTX 3090 cards. So this game, which is produced by Amazon Games, has caused multiple accounts of EVGA 3090 cards being bricked after playing the game. And after a little bit of looking into, and multiple people pointing out the issue, it became pretty quickly evident that it wasn't a standalone incident, or that it wasn't just a coincidence. So looking into it, the game didn't have a frame cap, which in this particular case meant that it could ask the graphics card to basically do unlimited frames, which then causes it to overwork itself and subsequently not be able to work. So the problem has been sort of fixed in two ways, and before people get too worried about it. I think, to the best of my knowledge, this incident has been limited to this one run of cards between the game and the firmware causing problems, and they are considerably expensive. So it's not something that everyone's going to have. It's something that only a few people are going to actually have. But still, when you're spending close to $2,000 on a graphics card, the last thing you want is for a single game to turn that into a brick. And not a pretty looking brick that you can use in masonry, because you can't use a graphics card in masonry. You could put it on your wall as a decoration afterwards, but that's about it. Aside from that, it's a fancy paperweight. So, back to how the problem was fixed. And I'm saying fixed in sort of air quotes. First, the game has since had a frame cap limiter placed in, so that the frame rate of the game doesn't exceed or doesn't try and overwhelm the graphics card. And the second sort of fix to it is EVGA has announced that it will replace cards that were bricked as a result of playing this game, which is very good, because I don't know. I know exactly how I'd feel if I had a $1,900 graphics card that I open up a game and all of a sudden the graphics card and my toolbox have the same amount of usefulness and the same amount of weight. Taking that back, toolbox has tools in it, so it's actually more useful than the graphics card. But that's where my talking of bricks is going to close for the day. The other two things that really caught my attention this past week are looking at something called Pegasus Spyware. The Pegasus Spyware was created by NSO Group, which is an Israeli company. And they end up licensing it to governments, although I think they have a set of terms and conditions that you're supposed to follow, and if you don't follow, you don't get access to the tool. But this is a particularly devious tool, in my opinion, because what it does is it allows for something called a zero-click attack, which means that you don't, as the device owner, you don't even need to put input, or you don't need any input to actually go and have it have that spyware get onto your device. And that means you can do something as simple as open up an email, or someone who has access to your device can install it. And this affects both iOS and Android, even if they are fully patched up with all the security updates. So if you have every single patch you're fully updated on your device, this can still get you. And when I say get you, it's something that someone has to deliberately send your way. And last I checked, their NSO Group is only licensing it to governments, because in private use this could be taken very far out of whack. So what's so bad about this spyware is not just how it can get onto your device, but what it can do. And what it does is it allows surveillance of your phone by surveillance, the spyware can transmit to whoever placed it on there. It can transmit a bunch of information, including SMS messages, emails, chats with something like WeChat. What else is there? Your photos or your videos. It can activate your mic or your camera. It can record calls. It can access GPS data, your calendar, and your contacts. And yes, that may sound like a long list, because it is a long list. And I guess the other interesting thing is that there's no real solution for prevention, and there's no easy way to tell if you've gotten that that's gotten onto your device. Although I think there is an online tool. Don't know exactly what tool it is, but there is one. And if you're concerned, be cautious looking for tools, because once again, this is a zero-click thing, which means if you go to the right place, I don't know if anyone else is messing around with it, but you still run the risk of, if you're not cautious, getting something like something along the lines of the spyware on your device. And whenever someone knows that there's a vulnerability people are going to be checking for, that is the easiest time to try and have a tool that you can download actually be malicious itself. So, while there isn't a real solution, there are a couple of trusted ways. So do your research. If you are concerned about whether or not you may have been affected by this, it's not likely to the best of my knowledge, but this is just getting out there. The breadth and scope of how many devices have this isn't quite yet known. So, best you can do is hope and pray. And I'm going to speedily finish off this episode by talking about, well, let's just say someone really breaking the speed limit. The speed limit of the internet, that is. So, Japan has managed to break the internet speed limit, or internet speed record, I should say, with a reading of 319 terabits per second. So the previous record for fastest internet speed was 179 terabits per second, which is still pretty incredible, and I can guarantee you right now, whatever network you have at home is not going to have this kind of speed. And this speed record what makes it even more fascinating, is that it was done over 1,864 miles of distance in the form of coiled cables. So if you think about it, you get let's say you go to the store, you get a 50-foot Ethernet cable, you plug one end into your computer, and your router's on the same table, so you plug the other end into that. The cable may only be traveling a foot from the computer to the router, but this data is traveling 50 feet through the wire. And that's using that same sort of principle by simulating distance there. So having that much cable, or that much fiber optic, I should say, in a coiled form, to be able to simulate that distance. And for those of you who don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, that equates to roughly 40 terabytes in 1 second. So if you have if you have an account with Microsoft for OneDrive, that will likely have, if you have the paid plan, you'll have a terabyte worth of storage per person. So if you've filled that up with cat photos, which means you have a very large amount of cat photos, that means you could download that in 1/40th of a second. And 40 terabytes, so that's about the measure of a terabyte, and I'm trying to figure out off the top of my head the easiest measurement of data that everyone's going to have easily accessible to them. I'll just say this. The average, I do want to be cautious. I'm just going to say this. Your average MP3 ends up being, if you have an average length song as an MP3 file, it's about 5 megabytes. So think about it. So whatever you're doing, every time you listen to a song, think about that as 5 megabytes, which you need 1,000 megabytes to create a gigabyte, and 1,000 gigabytes to make a terabyte. So instead of watching a song download to your device and watching that download with internet speed like this, you click down. The moment you click download, the download would end up being done before your finger releases from the or lifts off of the mouse click, which for me is impressive. So, with all that being said, I do hope you've enjoyed this episode of Charles Weekly Part T, which is episode 21 of season 21. And my closing thoughts are just we can push the limits of things. And if you think about it, it used to take 10 minutes to load up email, and when you loaded up the email, it didn't do nearly as much as it does today. So we've gotten far, and it'll be interesting to see how much faster we can get. And I will say, though, that terabits per second isn't coming to your house anytime soon. So, if you did enjoy this episode, I invite you to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you go to anchor.fm/CharlesWeeklyParty, you'll find links to all of your favorite podcasting platforms as well as all of our previous episodes. And you can also, on Anchor, interact by leaving a voice message, or if you desire, you can also support the podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a review. And you can almost always see the action on YouTube. So last week's episode 20 of the season, was not released on video because I was on the road and didn't have access to a reasonable set. So that was just the way things ended up panning out for that. And but this week it's back, so we'll see how things go. And I have mentioned in previous episodes that I'm thinking of taking a couple of weeks off, and not consecutive weeks off, so that you're not stuck with Charles's monthly party. So we'll see. I will announce a week in advance when you're not going to be getting an episode. So take care, have fun, and let your imagination run wild, because everything we see around us was once someone's imagination, and now it's become reality. So don't limit your imagination and your creativity. Take care and have a good one.